death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
Welcome to your daily true crime minisode. Today we will be discussing the case of Emmett Till. On July 25th, 1941, in Chicago, Illinois, Louis and Mamie Till welcomed their first son, Emmett, into the world. This is part 2 of the case of Emmett Till. In the 1950s in America, racial tensions were high. In 1954, the civil rights movement was just starting, and its purpose was to fight institutional racism, like segregated bathrooms, classrooms, and blacks' right to vote. What segregation means is that blacks and whites were not allowed to be mixed in together. An example of this is that they had different water fountains, one only black people could drink out of, and one only white people could drink out of. Despite all of this oppression, Emmett's friends describe him as being tough and having the best sense of humor. They said that he loved jokes and that he would actually pay people to tell him a joke. He was lively and he had the type of presence that demanded attention. Some of his friends would describe him as a natural-born leader. This is part 3 of the case of Emmett Till. On August 20th, 1955, Emmett left Chicago to stay with his great-uncle Moses Wright in Mississippi. Before leaving, his mother, Mamie, gave Emmett his father's ring. Sadly, when Emmett was 4 years old, his father had passed away. His mother also gave him advice. She said that Mississippi was very different than Chicago, and she was worried that with his outspoken and big personality, he would get in trouble. She taught him that he had to walk the sidewalks looking down, and if that a white person was walking in the sidewalk, he needed to get off. She told him that he needed to start saying no ma'am, yes ma'am, no sir, yes sir. In the documentary American Experience, Mamie says that at the time, she thought she was exaggerating with her advice to Emmett. This is part 4 of the case of Emmett Till. At the time, political tensions in Mississippi were high. A lot of white people were not happy because of two main things. The Brown versus the Board of Education occurred in 1954, which fought to end segregations in schools. And also, the NAACP was encouraging black people to register to vote. Depending on your resource, the events on August 24th can vary. I'm going to share 2 versions that this story has been told. Outside of a store in Money, Mississippi, Emmett was showing a picture of his classroom to his cousins, and he was showing them how his class was not segregated. He even mentioned that he had a white girlfriend. So his cousins dared him to flirt with a white woman behind the cashier counter. This is part 5 of the case of Emmett Till. From my research, the story that he was dared by his cousins to flirt with a girl behind the counter was not true. Allegedly, the defendant's lawyers would use this story in court to prove that Emmett was not the only one at fault, that his cousins were too because they encouraged him to go up to the woman and flirt with her. The second story is that there was never a picture of a classroom and he never said anything about a white girlfriend, and that they simply went inside to buy some candy. Behind the counter was 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant, who owned the store with her husband, Roy. Carolyn would later testify and say that in the store, Emmett touched her hand, grabbed her by the waist, and whispered obscene things in her ear while saying, "Let me take you on a date, baby." She said that she got so scared she went to her car to get a gun and they left. This is part 6 of the case of Emmett Till. Caroline claims that when she went to her car to grab the gun to scare the boys away, Emmett whistled at her before they all left. Now, the reasons why he whistled also vary. The number one reason is that he whistled at her as kind of a joke. So he did a wolf whistle, which is the The second reason is because when Emmett was younger, he got polio, and due to this, he would stutter. His mom taught him that before he was going to say a word starting with the letter B or D, to not stutter, he should whistle. The third reason is because there was apparently a game of chess outside and he whistled at a good move. This one I'm not too sure of. This is part 7 of the case of Emmett Till. On August 28th, 1955, Caroline's husband, Roy Bryant, and his brother-in-law, J.W. Milam, showed up at the house looking for Emmett. His uncle Mo says that it was terrifying. The two men were holding flashlights and guns. Emmett's great uncle and aunt pleaded with them not to take him. They even offered them money, but they took Emmett instead. When Emmett did not return home, the police were called. His uncle called Mamie and told him that Emmett was missing. 3 days later, on August 31st, Emmett's body was found in Tallahatchie River. He was unrecognizable. His face was mutilated. He had been beaten and thrown into the river. Bryant and Milam claimed that they just gave him a talking to and let him go, and they didn't hurt him at all. This is part 8 of the case of Emmett Till. When his body is found, his mother asks for it to be sent back to Chicago. When the casket came, it had been nailed shut because of how gruesome and unrecognizable Emmett looked. The only way his family was able to identify him was because of his father's ring that he was wearing. His mother demanded to have the casket opened. Although people had encouraged her not to, she decided to have an open casket funeral because she wanted for people to see what they had done to her son. 50,000 people showed up in Chicago to his funeral, and allegedly 1 in 5 people had to be helped out of the church because he looked so horrific they would faint or just had physical reactions. This is part 9 of the case of Emmett Till. In September, the trials began against Bryant and Milam for the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. The case proceedings were so informal. The jury was made up of 12 white men, and during the proceedings, they were allowed to drink beer. This courtroom was also segregated. Black people had to sit on one side and white people had to sit on another side. The trial lasted for 5 days. The jury says that they deliberated for an hour, but that actually it was less because they needed a soda break. At the end, Bryant and Milam were found not guilty of the crime. Emmett Till's case sparked the beginning of the civil rights movement. This is part 10 of the case of Emmett Till. Years later, Bryant and Milam would sell their story to a magazine where they admitted everything. But because in America there's double jeopardy, which means that you cannot go to trial for the same case twice or more than once, nothing happened until 2018 when this case was reopened. In 2017, a book called The Blood of Emmett Till by Timothy Tyson was released. In it, he had interviewed Caroline Bryant. Caroline Bryant recounted her entire story. She said that Emmett never grabbed her, never whispered things in her ear, and she wasn't even sure if he whistled. Some people believe that this case was reopened because of perjury, because she testified in court to the events.
This has got to be one of the most disturbing human experiments in history.
And the worst part is, it was done to children. Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor conducted a stuttering experiment on 22 orphans. You see, what happened was that the children were separated into 2 groups. The first group received positive speech therapy, while the second group received negative speech therapy. What did that mean? That means they were belittled for the way they spoke and were led to believe they had a speech impediment. These normal speaking children in the second group all developed speech problems, which they ended up retaining for the rest of their lives. This experiment is often referred to as the monster study. For more 7 Sins Crime, you can hit that plus button.
Kids Who Kill Part 2. This is Mary Bell, a girl who at the age of 11 became a serial killer. And we don't know what she looks like today, but she's alive and she's free. In 1968, at the age of only 11 years old, she lured 2 toddlers on separate occasions to abandoned houses and strangled them to death. She left notes at the last crime scene, taking responsibility. Police thought it was a prank. When they found an M carved into one of the boys' chests, they thought it could be Mary. She served the maximum sentence for a child killer in England, 12 years. So by the age of 23, she was out. And not only do they get to be free after 12 years, they get to change their identity and the government allows it. So she's anonymous and nobody knows what's happened to her other than she had a child at the age of 27. They say Mary had a very tough life growing up. Her mother was a prostitute that tried to kill her on multiple occasions by making her overdose on pills. Are these people born evil or do they just have bad parents?
These are people who went missing and were never found. Natalie Holloway disappeared on May 30th, 2005 while on a high school graduation trip to Aruba. She was last seen with 3 men, including Jordan Vandersloot, who's strongly believed to have something to do with her disappearance, considering he was caught on a hidden camera describing her death, but her case remains unsolved. Harold Holt was the Prime Minister of Australia when he disappeared in 1967 after going for a swim in the ocean, and despite huge search efforts, his body was never found. In June 1962, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence England escaped from their cells in Alcatraz. They left the island in a handmade raft, and though their bodies were never found, the FBI publicly concluded that they drowned, but there's been evidence over the years that they actually survived.
Hey, welcome to your daily True Crime Minisode. Today we're going to be discussing the case of Don Lewis, who is Carol Baskin's ex-husband. Yeah, that one. On August 18th, 1997 in Tampa, Florida, Don Lewis disappeared. He was last seen at 6 a.m. when he was loading a truck that was destined to Miami. On August 19th, his then wife, Carol Lewis, reported him as missing. Although she claims it was not odd for him to leave for days at a time without saying where he was going. His white 1989 Dodge was found abandoned at the Pilot Country Airport with the keys on the floorboard. Although he owned several planes, according to the Charlie Project, his aviator license had been suspended. Carol claims he ran away to his 200-acre property in Costa Rica, but his former wife and daughters believe foul play was involved. Don Lewis was a self-made millionaire. Don Lewis only had a high school diploma, but he was a hustler. He had several jobs, and he did struggle financially for a long time. But because Don was a go-getter, he started buying washing machines, fixing them, reselling them. Then he did the same thing with cars. Then he got into real estate, and all of a sudden, he started gaining money. He was worth approximately $6 million. He was able to maintain this financial prosperity because he was frugal. In fact, at the time of his disappearance, he was wearing a shirt from Kmart that was worth $1. According to an article on the Tampa Bay Times written by David Karp, when Don met Carol, he used a different name, and he said he worked for Don Lewis because he wanted to make sure she fell in love with him and not his money. After Dawn bought Carol a 6-month-old bobcat, she fell in love. She loved that bobcat so much that she convinced Dawn to get some more. They drove to Minnesota, where they were going to originally buy 6 bobcats, but upon arriving, they found out it was a fur farm. And Carol felt awful. She said that she couldn't just pick some and leave the rest. So they ended up buying 56 cats. This was the start of wildlife on Easy Street. Taking care of these animals ended up being a lot of money, and to help financially, Dawn decided to set up some of the cabins as bed and breakfast for $75 a night. According to the Tampa Bay article by David Karp, Carol and Dawn started arguing because Dawn wanted to sell some of the animals and Carol did not. On June 12, 1997, according to an article on the Tampa Bay Times written by David Karp, Don petitioned for a domestic violence injunction against his wife. Sadly, the judge didn't think that Don's life was in danger and he did not grant the petition. According to the petition, the argument started when Don went on a trip to Costa Rica. Don was known for going to yard sales and buying things, and sometimes he would fix those things up to resell them. While he was away on this trip, Carol allegedly called a haul truck and threw all of these things away. When Don returned and realized that all of these things were missing, an argument started with the couple, and that's when Don decided that he was going to file the petition. These are a few things I was shocked to learn from the Don Lewis disappearance. The first shocking thing I learned is that although cops claim that they searched the entire property for any evidence, they did not test the meat grinder for DNA. The second shocking thing that I learned is that allegedly Baskin's brother worked with the sheriff's department at the time of his disappearance. And number 3, and this is allegedly, after Don's disappearance, Carol started dating another man who ended up putting a restraining order against her. He claims that he feared for his life, and allegedly, he asked her what would happen when her husband returned. And she allegedly said that dead bodies can't talk. Imagine having people think you killed your husband or wife and not being able to prove otherwise. Without a body, there's nothing I can do to clear my name.